Two fishermen out for what should have been a peaceful day, they noticed a suitcase half submerged near the muddy riverbank. At first they ignored it. People dumped trash all the time. But as their boat drifted closer, a smell hit them, thick, rotten, unnatural. One of them, a man in his 60s, covered his nose. "Something's dead in there," he muttered. But the younger man, curiosity gnawing at him, grabbed a stick and nudged the suitcase. It bobbed, heavy. Too heavy. Then, it tipped just slightly and the zipper split open. What spilled out made their blood run cold. A hand. Pale, lifeless, swollen from the water. Panic surged through them. The older man staggered back, nearly falling into the river. The younger man fumbled for his phone, hands shaking. 911. "We found a body. In a suitcase. Please send someone now." Within minutes, sirens tore through the quiet morning air. Police boats cut through the water. Officers swarmed the riverbank, faces set in grim determination. A detective, one who had seen too much in his career, knelt beside the suitcase, his gloved hands slowly unzipping it the rest of the way. Inside, the horror deepened. Welcome to True Crime Stories videos. I welcome you, my viewers, and most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing you daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. An elderly woman, curled unnaturally, her frail frame crammed into the tight space. Her body told a silent story, one of suffering, of fear. She had been gone for days, maybe longer. The stench of death clung to the fabric, to the very air. Then came the real shock. They knew her. A missing persons report had come in just weeks earlier. An 80-year-old woman, Judy Hurley, last seen at her home in Portland. Bedridden. Helpless. How did she end up here, discarded like trash? Detectives exchanged looks. Something wasn't right. A suitcase doesn't float down a river by accident. Someone had put it there. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide this woman's body, to erase her existence. And that meant they weren't just dealing with a body. They were dealing with a killer. A murderer still out there. Watching. Waiting. And the question that sent chills through the officers' spines. If Judy Hurley had been missing for weeks, then who had been living in her house? Judy Hurley was 80 years old. A woman who had once lived a full life, now confined to a bed. Her body had grown weak, but her mind was still sharp. She had memories, decades of them, of love, loss, and quiet moments in between. She had no children. No husband. Just time, and a home she had lived in for most of her life. But in her final years, even that had started slipping away. Judy wasn't rich. She didn't have much, but what she had, she held on to. Her house, her belongings, the little independence she had left. But life had different plans. As her health declined, she depended on the kindness of two friends, Leslie Ortiz and Justin Meisner. They weren't family, but in a way they had become like one. They checked on her, made sure she had food, helped her when she couldn't help herself. They did what they could, but deep down they knew Judy needed more. She couldn't walk without help. Some days she could barely lift a spoon to her mouth. She was vulnerable. Alone. And in a world like this, that made her a target. Leslie and Justin made a difficult choice. They helped Judy move into a retirement home, a place where she would be cared for. It wasn't easy. Judy had spent her entire life in her house. She didn't want to leave. But in the end she trusted them. She packed a small suitcase, a few clothes, her favorite book, an old photo of her parents. Everything else stayed behind. And then, someone else moved in. At first it was subtle. A light on at night when no one should be there. A curtain shifting when the wind was still. Neighbors noticed, but they assumed Judy had someone looking after the place. Then the house started changing. Windows stayed boarded up. The front porch, once neat and welcoming, became cluttered with trash. Strangers came and went at odd hours, their faces unfamiliar, their presence unsettling. Judy's house, her safe place, her home, had been taken over. Leslie and Justin tried to fight it. They called the police, but no one seemed to listen. They weren't the homeowners. They had no power. Weeks passed. Judy, in her new room at the retirement home, kept asking about her house. Is it still there? Is it okay? Leslie told her not to worry. They didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. Then Judy disappeared. One day her bed was empty. Her few belongings left behind. No one saw her leave. No one saw anything. And 2 weeks later her body turned up in a suitcase. A woman who had spent her last years trapped in her own body, discarded like she meant nothing. But she did mean something. And now the people who took everything from her were the prime suspects. The suitcase sat on the muddy riverbank, half-zipped, its secret exposed. The air was thick with the stench of death, the kind that clings to your skin that you never forget. Detectives stood in silence, staring at the frail, lifeless body inside. Judy Hurley, an 80-year-old woman who couldn't even walk on her own, had been stuffed into a suitcase and thrown away like garbage. One officer turned away, covering his mouth. Another muttered, "Who could do this?" The medical examiner moved in, gloved hands steady, eyes cold and experienced. They had seen death before, but not like this. Judy's body was curled unnaturally, her limbs folded as if someone had forced them into place. She hadn't just been killed. She had been hidden. They checked for obvious wounds, signs of a struggle, anything that could explain what happened. But there was no blood, no defensive injuries. Just a fragile, elderly woman whose life had been taken. For what? This wasn't a robbery. Her jewelry was still on her. Her old watch, delicate and worn from time, still clung to her wrist. Whoever did this didn't take anything. Which meant, they took her life for another reason. Detectives needed answers, and they needed them fast. They started retracing Judy's last known movements. They called the retirement home. The staff was shocked. "She left weeks ago. We thought her friends took her." Leslie and Justin, the people who cared about Judy the most, were devastated. They hadn't seen her. They had spent days worrying, calling hospitals, checking shelters, hoping she was safe somewhere. But she wasn't. Now they had to face a new, chilling reality. Someone had taken her. Someone had killed her. And that same person had walked freely for weeks, knowing exactly what they had done. Back at Judy's house, the investigation took a darker turn. Detectives arrived, knocking on the door, expecting silence. Instead it opened. Someone was living there. And they had no idea Judy had been found. The door to Judy Hurley's house creaked open. Detectives stood frozen, expecting silence, an empty room, maybe even signs of forced entry. A man stood in the doorway, but what they found was something much dark and empty, his clothes wrinkled like he had been sleeping in them for days. He didn't seem surprised. One detective cleared his throat. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked past them, calculating, thinking. Then he shrugged. "I live here." Detectives exchanged a glance. Judy Hurley had been dead for weeks. Someone had taken her home, moved into her life like she never existed. And now, they were standing right in front of him. The man's name was Michael Darwin Moody, 54 years old. A criminal record that stretched back decades. Police didn't have enough to arrest him, not yet. But something about him wasn't right. They needed more. That's when the surveillance footage came in. A grainy camera from a gas station near Sauvie Island. A black SUV pulling up late at night. A man stepping out, dragging something heavy. A suitcase. The timestamp? Days after Judy was last seen. Detectives watched the footage over and over. They zoomed in, sharpened the image. And then, a face. Michael Darwin Moody. Police started digging into his past. What they found was chilling. Years of violence. Assault charges. Evictions from homes that weren't his. A pattern. He preyed on the weak. And Judy Hurley? She had been the perfect target. She was elderly. Alone. Helpless. Now detectives had their suspect. But there was a problem. Moody was gone. The day after detectives knocked on his door, he vanished. And now the manhunt had begun. For days Michael Darwin Moody was a ghost. The man who had been living in Judy Hurley's home, the man seen dragging a suitcase near the river, had vanished the moment police started asking questions. Detectives searched everywhere. His name was in every database. Every officer in the area had his picture. But he was careful. He knew how to disappear. Then a break. February 20th, 2025. A small motel. The kind of place where no one asks questions. The manager was checking the register when he saw the news. A name. A face. A wanted man. His hands shook as he reached for the phone. 911. Moments later, police swarmed the parking lot. Inside, Moody sat on the edge of a motel bed, staring at the flickering TV screen. He didn't run. Didn't fight. When officers burst through the door, he just sighed and put his hands behind his back. As they cuffed him, one detective asked, "Why'd you do it?" Moody didn't answer. Didn't even look up. He just smirked. Back at the station, detectives laid out the case. Second-degree murder. Abuse of a corpse. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage. A black SUV. A suitcase. A man who looked exactly like Moody. Witnesses. People who saw him living in Judy's house, wearing her clothes, selling her things. And then, his past. A lifetime of preying on the weak, stealing from the helpless. But the most chilling evidence? Inside that motel room in his duffel bag was Judy's old watch. A tiny piece of her life, still ticking, still holding on. Unlike her, Michael Moody had been caught. But one question remained. Why did he do it? And was he really alone? What really happened to Judy Hurley? Detectives had the man. Michael Moody was in custody. But one question still haunted them. How did an 80-year-old bedridden woman end up stuffed in a suitcase, floating in a river? They needed answers. Investigators started piecing together Judy's final days. The retirement home had records. Judy was last seen on a cold January afternoon. Staff remembered her sitting near the window, wrapped in a blanket. Quiet, frail, waiting for something. And then she was gone. No one remembered seeing her leave. No paperwork. No transport request. Just gone. But at her house things had changed. Neighbors saw people coming and going. Strangers. Moody. Judy's once tidy home was now a den of chaos. The door left unlocked. Lights on at odd hours. Furniture missing, sold piece by piece. Like her entire life was being erased. So how did Moody get in? One theory, he tricked her. Maybe he came to her door, pretending to be someone she could trust. A kind stranger. A helper. Someone offering to bring her home. Another theory, he didn't give her a choice. What detectives did know. Judy never stood a chance. She was too weak to fight. Too fragile to scream. And Moody, he had done this before. But where did it happen? Inside her home? Or somewhere else? Detectives searched every inch of the house. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Judy had lived there for years. That home held her entire life. And yet, it wasn't where she died. Which meant someone moved her. But why? And was Moody really working alone? Why did Michael Moody target Judy Hurley? Detectives had pieced together her final days. They knew she had been taken from the retirement home. They knew she never made it back. But the biggest question still remained. What? Some believed Judy knew too much. Her home had become a haven for strangers. People she didn't know, didn't trust. Moody was one of them. Had she tried to take back what was hers? Had she threatened to go to the police? If so, that would have made her a problem. And Moody? He knew how to make problems disappear. Then there was the money. Judy wasn't rich. She had no fortune, no hidden bank accounts. But she had something valuable. Her home. A place to hide. A place to sell. A place to use. Had Moody promised to pay her? Maybe he owed her money and couldn't deliver. Maybe she asked for what was hers. And Moody, instead of paying her back, made sure she never asked again. There was another theory. Something colder. Crueler. Maybe it wasn't about money. Maybe it wasn't about silencing her. Maybe Moody did it just because he could. Some people take what they want. They don't think about the cost. Judy Hurley was alone, bedridden, vulnerable. And Moody? He was a man who had spent his life taking. Whatever the truth was, one thing was clear. Judy's house had been stolen long before her body was found in that suitcase. Her home, her safety, her life. All of it was gone. There was one fact no one could ignore. Judy Hurley didn't just vanish overnight. Her body was found in a suitcase floating near the shore. But how long had she been missing? How long had she laid forgotten while life moved on without her? The truth was chilling. No one had reported her missing. Not right away. Not when she should have been in her retirement home, safe. Not when her house was suddenly full of strangers, her things disappearing piece by piece. Judy Hurley had been gone for weeks. And no one had noticed. Detectives had Michael Moody in custody. They had evidence, a motive, but was he really alone? Some people refused to believe one man could do this alone. There were too many moving parts. Too many people benefiting from Judy's disappearance. Who let Moody into her home? Who else had access? Did someone help him cover his tracks? Or worse, did someone else know Judy was in danger, and do nothing? If there were more people involved, they were still out there. And that meant, this wasn't over. The public wanted justice. Judy wasn't just a name in a police report. She was a mother, a friend, someone who deserved better. People demanded answers. They wanted to know who had taken advantage of her. Who had stolen her home. Who had stood by while she suffered. But the most haunting question of all? How many other Judas are out there, waiting to be found? The truth about Judy Hurley's death had finally come to light. But the damage had already been done. She was gone. And now the world had to face an ugly reality. How did this happen to an 80-year-old woman? And why didn't anyone stop it? The community was in shock. Judy wasn't just a name in a headline. She was someone's mother. Someone's friend. Neighbors who had once waved to her from their porches were now wondering, Had they missed the signs? How had her house, her safe place, been stolen from her? Why had no one stepped in when strangers took over her home? And why did it take so long for anyone to notice she was missing? Her friends spoke out. They shared memories of the woman she used to be. Not just the frail, bedridden woman trapped in her final days, but the Judy before that. The one who loved to garden. The one who laughed at bad jokes. The one who never asked for much. She had given so much to the world. And in the end, the world had failed her. The outrage was immediate. People demanded justice. They called for laws to protect vulnerable seniors. No more forgotten victims. No more Judas. Local officials promised change, stricter regulations, better oversight of retirement homes, harsher penalties for those who exploit the elderly. But for Judy it was too late. Meanwhile, Michael Moody sat in a jail cell waiting. He had been charged with second-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. But would he actually pay for what he did? Would he stand trial? Face a jury? Get the punishment he deserved? Or would he find a way out, like so many before him? The fight for justice wasn't over. Not for Judy. And not for the next victim who still had a chance to be saved. Judy Hurley's story should have ended peacefully. She should have spent her final days surrounded by warmth, by love, by people who cared. Instead, she was forgotten. And in that silence, someone took everything from her. Why was Judy targeted? Did Michael Moody owe her something? Did she see something she wasn't supposed to? Or was it something even worse, that he thought no one would miss her? Because for weeks, no one did. Her home, the place she had lived for so long, was taken over. Strangers walked through her doors, used her things, took her life piece by piece. And outside the world kept moving. No one asked, "Where's Judy?" until it was too late. The image of that suitcase will never leave the minds of those who saw it. Floating near the shore. A horrible smell in the air. The weight of a life that someone tried to throw away. But Judy wasn't trash. She was a person. And now, she is a haunting reminder. A reminder of how easy it is to ignore what's right in front of us. A reminder that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they walk among us. And a reminder that this can happen again. Right now there are more Judas out there. Elderly. Alone. Forgotten. People who should be safe, but aren't. This tragedy should have been prevented. Maybe it still can be. Maybe someone somewhere sees something right now. A neighbor they haven't seen in weeks. A house where strangers keep coming and going. A call that should have been made, but wasn't. It's not too late for them. Don't ignore the signs. Don't let another Judy Hurley become just a headline. Because next time, it could be someone you love.